The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi proposed initiative called LiFE, Lifestyle for the Environment, and he proposed it for Indians as well as made it a challenge for the rest of the world to follow, instead of just preaching to developing countries about how they have to stop doing this and that and burning coal and reducing their emissions, etc., etc. So IEA went ahead and did an analysis on the lessons we could glean so far from LiFE, the benefits of advancing the lifestyle for environment initiative through the G20. As we are speaking now in February 2023, India is the current president of G20, so this is a key moment to look at this. The key findings of the report we'll read first. The Lifestyle for the Environment initiative was launched by Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India at COP26 in Glasgow in November 2021. Of course, it aims to encourage adoption of sustainable lifestyles in India and internationally to tackle the challenges of environmental degradation and climate change. India has integrated several policies in its energy transition strategy that are aligned with its initiative LiFE. India's economy is already 10% more energy efficient than both the global and G20 average. I'll look at the plot in a minute. India took less time to go from half the full electricity access than other major economies, so we'll look at the rate of change compared to other countries. Already the third largest national market globally for renewables, India has recently seen the growth of consumer-centric solutions like the distributed solar PV take off, with rooftop solar growing 30-fold in less than a decade. Supportive policies and awareness campaigns in India have also driven electric passenger vehicles to a market share of almost 5% in 2022, with the sales tripling from 2021, and many of these cars are produced within the country. India's example shows the importance of behavioral change and consumption choices in driving energy transitions. The IEA has analyzed the impact of measures like those proposed by the LiFE initiative, such as buying an EV or taking public transportation as part of the comprehensive energy transition strategies. According to the IEA modeling, the adoption worldwide of the kinds of actions and measures targeted by LiFE, including behavioral changes and sustainable consumer choices, would reduce annual global carbon dioxide emissions by more than 2 billion tons in 2030, and this is about 1/5 of the emissions reductions needed by 2030 to put the world on a pathway to net zero emissions. So that's a fantastic contribution. We estimate that around 60% of the emissions saving by LiFE measures could be directly influenced or mandated by governments. How individuals behave and choose to consume is shaped by the norms, policies, incentives, and infrastructure around them. So one has to make public transportation possible for people to make that choice, for example, and there should be some norms about eventually about how who gets to drive and who needs to take public transportation, and so on. Thus, although the measures envisaged in LiFE are carried out by individuals, there is a clear role for governments to simultaneously provide a supportive policy framework with incentives. LiFE measures would also save consumers globally around $440 billion in 2030, according to the IEA's modeling, equivalent to around 5% of all spending on fuels across the global economy in 2030. LiFE measures also help lower inequalities in energy consumption and emissions between countries. The reductions in per capita CO2 emissions in advanced economies by 2030 relative to a business as usual trajectory are 3 to 4 times greater than in emerging markets and developing economies. India's first G20 presidency could strengthen the LiFE initiative by anchoring it in the G20's current framing of energy transitions and initiating processes to gather experience and best practices of policies and programs that G20 members are already conducting. Okay, looking at some data, key per capita indicators in India as a percentage of global averages over 2000 and from 2000 to 2021. So we're just comparing. GDP was about 20% of the global per capita average. Now it's jumped to 40%. Energy demand has gone from about 25% to 35%. Oil demand up. Coal is up, which is not good news. It's gone per capita to more than 60%. As the economy grows and energy markets continue to behave unfavorably for India, like with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, forcing India, and sanctions on Iran, forcing India to do certain things, like rely on its own plentiful coal supply, which of course is bad for its own citizens in terms of health, but we know these compromises are made to prioritize economic development. Residential energy use has not gone up much, which is good news. Steel and cement have gone up, of course. Infrastructure and construction are big booms. We have looked at the previous podcast on how these demands have to be, turned into demand side pull for green steel, for example. Car ownerships have gone up tremendously and will continue to grow, but if more and more EVs are becoming part of the new car ownerships, then that's good news, of course. And CO2 emissions per capita have gone from the global percentage wise 20% to now almost 40%. So that's something to remember. Recent progress in access to electricity in India and normalized rate of improvement in electrification. So if you look at the India's population, which has grown over this period, and we have crossed China by now, the number of people without access dropped from around 400 million to now near zero by 2021. So there were a couple of government programs which made this happen. And if you look at normalized access rates, so 45% access rate here is taken as zero, so the time is different. So that's how UK went from 45% access rate to 100%, and India, on the other hand, did it at a much faster rate to reach 100% from 45%, which is remarkable for such a big country with such a large population and such diverse terrains and so on. Key energy efficiency indicators: India versus G20 and world averages. So megajoules per US dollar 2015 purchasing power parity. So energy intensity of 2019, world was here at 4.8 or so megajoules per US dollar, and India is down here at minus 11% of the world, and lower than G20 by about let's say 10% here. Liters of gasoline equivalent per 1,000 kilometers fuel economy in the new light-duty vehicles in 2021. World was up here at 7 LGE per 1,000 kilometers, for 100 kilometers, sorry. G20 a little bit lower than that, and India is at minus 20% of that. So that's fuel economy is always very important, right? Index with G20 to be 1. Cement energy intensity for 2019 was 12% lower than the world average, whereas G20 was at 1. So world average was above 1, above G20. Electric passenger vehicle market share in India from 2020-2021 has gone up from less than 1% to now almost 5%, and is expected to continue to grow. Of course, charging station network and how the charging happens with dirty energy or clean energy is still something to worry about. Nonetheless, increase in distributed solar PV capacity in India over 2010 to 2022 in gigawatts. You can see here off-grid commercial is a massive player, and residentials have grown as well, now to almost 15 gigawatts in 2022. So IEA models both behavioral changes and sustainable consumption choices in its energy transition scenarios. So behavioral changes refers to active and ongoing changes in energy use by consumers which tackle excessive or wasteful energy consumption. Examples of the kind of measures that the IEA models include: replacing business flights with teleconferencing, driving more slowly on highways, reducing car use in favor of active or public transportation, and adjusting thermostats in the buildings. Many of the tendencies here have been kind of in the wrong way, in the sense with growing economy, growing middle class, people have been leaving lights on longer. Markets leave the lights on, shops and malls and so on, and people have been running the AC more and wearing warm clothes instead of dressing more comfortably within their own homes. Offices running at very cold temperatures and so on and so forth. So LiFE wants to address all those bad habits. Sustainable consumption choices include consumer purchases of low emissions equipment and technologies as a result both of policy support and greater awareness. Examples include consumers preferring electric vehicles, purchasing highly efficient appliances, or switching from natural gas to induction-based cooking. Okay, so looking at some numbers, reductions in annual global CO2 emissions from LiFE measures by 2030 are expected to be, in terms of behavioral measures and sustainable consumer choices, which include eco-households, eco-transport, reduced flying, recycling, and clean vehicle, clean appliance, and clean electricity choices. So reductions by measure here, eco-friendly households, eco-transport, reducing flying is not as much, recycling is a bit, and then you go to clean vehicle, clean appliance, and clean electricity choices. So that's in million tons of CO2, so that's pretty good. We already talked about what percentage of reduction needed that amounts to. In terms of reductions by measures in million tons of CO2, discretionary, of which do not require infrastructure, of which require infrastructure. So here, eco-households refers to measures such as adjusting thermostats in buildings or switching off appliances. Eco-transport refers to measures such as slower driving speeds, carpooling, and public transportation use. Reduced flying includes substituting flights with teleconferencing or modal shift to high-speed rail. Recycling refers to recycling of goods to reduce the need for primary production of materials like steel or plastics. Clean vehicle choices include purchases of EVs. Clean appliance choices refers to the purchase of energy efficient or low emissions appliances. Clean electricity choices refers to the installation of rooftop solar PV on households. Coming to the end, change in CO2 per capita relative to the baseline due to behavioral changes in 2030 in kilogram CO2 per capita for advanced economies will come from cars, aviation, and buildings. Emerging market and developing economies will not achieve as much reduction, but they will achieve quite a bit also because of cars, buildings, and some contribution from aviation as well. Okay, so with the idea that G20 can adopt these LiFE initiative and do its own thing, the conclusion to this paper offers some principles on the basis of which the G20 could strengthen LiFE by establishing a G20 specific initiative. Country driven, different countries face different circumstances and have different cultural traditions and policy-making priorities. In some, heating is a significant source of energy demand. In others, it's cooling, so it depends on the latitude. Some countries are still urbanizing. Some are highly urbanized already with long-established infrastructure. Some countries will prefer to focus on how consumers can drive technological and market transformation through their consumption choices. Others may focus more on behavioral change. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to promoting behavioral change and sustainable consumption. LiFE can provide an impetus, but countries will need to choose their own priorities. There is another point here that research shows that peer pressure can act as a force for good. So people may soon begin to realize polluting is like smoking. It's not a good thing. So people may just to feel, there may be a social stigma to doing things that are not sustainable and low emission. Building on existing approaches, essentially all G20 countries are already taking some measures related to LiFE, be they on energy efficiency in buildings, the adoption of EVs, the use of public transport, the deployment of rooftop solar PV, or reducing excess energy consumption for heating. Indeed, in the face of the global energy crisis, many governments are increasingly putting in place policies and campaigns focused on saving energy. The objective of LiFE is therefore not to duplicate these policies but to measure a more active and visible engagement of consumers and citizens. Policy-driven initiatives. Individuals are embedded in society. How they behave and choose to consume is shaped by norms, policies, and the incentives and infrastructure around them, as we said in the beginning. LiFE should have an active focus on how policies can enable consumer choices and behavioral change. So when people are ready to make these choices, infrastructure should be in place, policy incentives should be in place, and norms should allow these adoptions, make it be very readily available and possible. Information sharing and iteration, embedding LiFE within G20 working groups and engagement with international organizations offers an opportunity for countries to share best practices and success stories and to ensure linkages between different policy areas. An iterative bottom-up process of knowledge. I cut it off, but you can read it up. Sorry about that. Okay, so you get the idea. LiFE, Lifestyle for the Environment initiative from India by Prime Minister Narendra Modi has already had impacts, is expected to be a contributor to reducing emissions by 2030, and adoption by G20 is going to have amplifying effect, which is very welcome. So India is leading by example here in terms of offering LiFE lessons. Okay.